Hi, good Monday morning. I hope that you're well. I'm back with a new video series where we are gonna look at how we can build a calculator application using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I'm gonna start off by showing you the final version of the application, like how it is gonna look like at the end. So let's start off by uh, getting rid of reserve because we don't really need him. So here is the final version of the application. So we've got a background image that is covering the entire viewport width and height, and here we've got this container that is centered both vertically and horizontally, and it has an area that renders the result and also the expression, and down below we have the buttons. So this is gonna be a multi-part series. So in the first one we're gonna like build the interface with HTML and CSS, and in another video, like after the first one, we'll um, like fire up the functionality with JavaScript. So let's get started. So as a basic setup, I've created a calculator app folder on my desktop, and inside of it I've added two files. So one is called index.html and the other is called index.css, and then there are also two images. One is for the background and the other is for these three dots. So let's start off by writing the markup. So I'll start by creating the basic document structure. So for that, I'm gonna use an Emmet shortcut. So I'm just gonna type in HTML:5 and then gonna press tab, and it will create the document structure for me. Here I'll say calculator, and let's open this up in the web browser. So here we are, and the title calculator is showing up. Now let's add an h1 that will say calculator. Now each time I make a change to the HTML or CSS, I have to like reload the browser, and then this can be really time consuming. And what we are gonna use for this tutorial is an extension called Live Server by Ritwik Day. I hope that I have pronounced his name correctly. So I have it already installed. So if you don't have it installed, you'll see an install button here, and if you will click that, it will be installed. And this extension will add a button at the bottom right corner of the code editor, so you can press that and it will open up the document in your default browser, I think. So now let's add a few exclamation marks, then press Command S to save. And now if I were to head over to the browser, I can see that the changes are being reflected without the need of reload. This is kind of nice, and it can save us a lot of time. So yeah, I'll start off by writing a main element, and I'm gonna add the role of application to it because I want screen readers and assistive devices to treat it like a desktop application. So I would recommend that you should check this MDN application role documentation page out if you're interested in having more information about it. So yeah, um, like there are two areas. One is for the output and the other is for controls. So for that, I'm gonna add two divs, and And on the first div, I'm gonna add a class of output, and for the second one, I'm gonna give it a class of controls, and then here inside of a div, I'm gonna put the output. Let's start with 0, and here we're gonna put uh, these 19 buttons. So now to save us time, I pre-wrote this markup, so I'm just gonna copy that and paste it here. So here we have 20 button elements with the text content inside of them. And now let's head over to the browser and see how this looks. So here is the output area, and next to it are the buttons. Now you might be wondering that why are we having aria hidden set to true here, and what are these styles for? Well, in the final version we have like this area, which is just presentational, like it's not clickable or usable. So what aria hidden is doing is that it's hiding that from assistive devices like screen readers, and style pointer events none is making sure that it's not usable via a mouse. So I can like hover over all of these buttons, and these are changing their colors, like hover styles are being applied. But if I were to head over to this one, like nothing happens. Like with these ones, I can like use these with my mouse, but here I can't do anything. Now one thing that I'll also add is tab index, and I'll set that to -1. So it will make this button inaccessible for keyboard users. Now I think we're done with the markup here, so let's style it to to make it look something like this. So first let's add the link to the CSS file. Just as a test, I'm gonna target all of the elements, and then I'm gonna set their color to red. And yeah, the style sheet is being loaded successfully. So I'm gonna start off by writing a comment at the top of the CSS file. I'll say basic setup, and I'll start off by writing a little reset. So I'm gonna set the margin for all of the elements to 0, and the padding as well to 0, and then I'm also gonna set the box sizing to border box. So by default, each and every browser has its own style sheet, and it like all the browsers apply some default styles to various elements. So like the margins and paddings can be inconsistent in some cases. So this is like normalizing the margins and paddings across all of the browsers. I hope that this makes sense. If it doesn't, please let me know down in the comments. Then I'm gonna set like target the HTML element, and then gonna set the font size to 62.5%. So this equals 10 pixels. So this is a trick that's commonly used in web design to make sizing things easier. So by default, the HTML element in most cases has a font size of 16 pixels. So I'm resetting that to 10 pixels. So let's say the font size for an element to 20 pixels. I can say 2 rem. Like I don't, I no longer have to make weird calculations. Sorry for the bad explanation. You can Google this and you'll find plenty of great articles about it. So let's add this background image to the body. So for that, I'm gonna use the background property and the URL function, and here I'll type in the name of the image. So I can say bg.jpg. Now make sure that the name and the file extension exactly matches what we have here in the file explorer, otherwise it won't work. So yeah, the background image is showing up. Now it doesn't look that good. So what we're gonna do is that we're gonna add a linear gradient on top of the background image, and for that we're gonna use the linear gradient function. And what I'm gonna do to save us time is that I'm gonna copy this linear gradient from here and then paste it here. Now let's head over to the browser. So it now looks a lot better. Now let's center this both vertically and horizontally and make it look something like this. So for that I'm gonna use Flexbox. So I'll set display to flex on the body element, and let's see how this looks. So this looks almost identical. Um, let's use justify content and set that to center things along the x direction, and for the y direction we're gonna use the align items property. Now, like, this is not in the middle of the document in the y direction, and the reason for that is the body element has a height of like 40 pixels. So currently it's taking up the height of its content, and this is not what we want. We want the body to take up the entire viewport height. So we'll say height 100 vh. So now it's perfectly centered in the y direction. So to save us time, I've also like created some variables for the color palette. So I'm gonna add those CSS variables in the root selector. Now I'm gonna set the color for the body to be color text 1. So here we are using CSS variables. So we define them by using two hyphens up front, and then the name of the variable, and then the value, and then we reference them using the for keyword, and then the braces, and then the name of the variable. So now as you can see that the 0 has turned white. Now let's change the font size of the entire document, and for that I'm creating a default font size variable, and let's maybe go with 32 pixels, which is going to translate to 3.2 rem. And here I'll say font size 3.2 rem. Now it looks better. Now you might be noticing that the buttons are not taking up this font size, and the reason for that, buttons have a font size set to them by default, via the user agent style here, so we can override that. So we can say font size, and here we can say inherit. So this will inherit from the body in this case, and now the buttons are appearing bigger. Now let's constrain the width of like this main area so that it looks something like this. So I'm gonna say main and then max width, and let's maybe go with 400 pixels. So yeah, let's apply this background to the main. So we're gonna use the background property as we did earlier, and here I'm gonna say color bg1. Yeah, so now the background has turned into that, and now let's update the background for this output. So as you can see that this area has a different background than this one. So for that I'll say dot output, and then the background g2 now the background for this is different, but it's kind of hard to see. Now let's maybe style these buttons because currently they look very ugly. So I'm gonna remove the white background by setting that to none, and let's also remove the border. And the font color is not inherited from the body. To to change the color, we can say that color inherit. So now it is inheriting the color from the body. Now let's lay these buttons out like these, like 4 in a row, and for that we're gonna use Flexbox. So I'll target the controls element because the buttons are wrapped inside of a div with a class of controls. So here I'm targeting that, and then I'm setting the display to flex. This will set up the Flexbox context. So here, as you can see, by setting the display to flex, we've now got everything in a row. So we want font button to take up 25% of the available width, and for that we're gonna use the flex property. So I'm gonna say flex 00 25%. So now font button is taking up 25% of the available space here, and some of the buttons are overflowing because like 25% times 4 is equals 100%, so they don't have space left for them. So in order to fix this, we can use fix the overflow issue. We can use the flex wrap property. So I'll say flex wrap and wrap. What this essentially means is that when there is no space available, wrap the contents to the next line. Now let's add some padding so that they don't look too cluttered. So for the padding, I'll say, let's say maybe 2 rem on all sides, and I think it looks okay. And yeah, the controls are pretty close to what we have here. Let's update the font size for the document. So in this case, we're gonna use Quicksand. You can find that on Google Fonts. So I'm gonna search here for Quicksand, and I'm gonna select regular 400, and then I'm gonna embed this font into the head of my document before the CSS link tag, and then in my CSS I'm gonna say here font family, and I'm gonna set that to Quicksand. And then if that doesn't load for some reason, we're gonna use sans serif as a fallback. So the font family for this 0 has updated, but not for the buttons, and that is because they have their font family set to some default system font, and we're gonna override that. So I'll say font family inherit, so that will change their font family. And here you can see that they are a bit more gray, so let's use this color for them. So instead of inherit, we're gonna say color text 2. Yeah. Now let's style this output area. So let's first bring in the image, like the 3 dots image. So for that I'm gonna use the image tag, and for its source value I'm gonna type in the name of the dots image. And because in this case, like, the dots image live in the same place as the HTML file, so we don't have to like type in any path or give it like dot slash, or like if there were a image directory, then we would have that image slash dots.svg, but in this case the image lives in the same directory as the HTML, so we don't have to write any of that. And for the alt, I'm not gonna give it an alt because I'm gonna hide it from screen readers. We are using aria hidden, and I'm gonna set that to true, so screen readers are gonna ignore this. So yeah, currently they are too big, so let's change the height of the image so that they appear a bit smaller. So for the height I'm gonna say 2 rem maybe. It's too big, so let's maybe go with 1.5 rem. And let's add some padding in here. So for the output I'm gonna say padding, and for the top let's go with 6 rem, and 2 rem for the left and right, and for the bottom let's also go with 2 rem. So this is the shorthand for padding, so this will translate to like this is going to be applied to the top, and this is going to be applied to the left and right, and this is going to be applied to the bottom. So let's see how this looks. This looks better than before. Now let's position these 3 dots to the top left corner like we have here, and for that we're gonna use absolute positioning. So here I'll say position absolute, and then I'm gonna set the top to be 0 and the left to be also 0, so that it's in the top left corner of the element. Now what happened here is that the browser took it out of the normal document flow and positioned it relative to the root of the document, which is not what we want here. We want it to be positioned relative to this output element. So for that we can set the positioning context by using position relative on the output element. So now it's positioned relative to the output element. Now maybe it's too close to the ends, so let's update the top and left to maybe 1 gram. I think it looks okay. Now let's also add the expression. So for now, say 10 minus 10, which results in 0. And let's see how this looks. So we want these to be aligned to the right here, like we have here. And for that, we're gonna use Flexbox once again. So for the output, I'll set the display to flex, and this will cause the items to appear in a row. So here is the first div and then the second div next to it. So by default, like items are laid across the X direction. So there are two axes in Flexbox. So one is the main axis that goes across the X direction, and the other is the Y axis. So we can alter the direction of the main axis so that it goes from like top to bottom, like in the Y direction instead of the X direction, using the flex direction property. So I'm gonna set the flex direction to column here. So now they are like appearing in columns. Like the main axis is from top to bottom in the Y direction, and the items are still laid side by side. But the direction is like this Y direction. Let's align them to the end. So for that, like this is now the main axis, and this is now the main axis, and this is the cross axis. So for aligning across the cross axis, we use the align items property, and we're gonna use flex end as the value because we want these to be aligned at the end. So now let's make the font size for this bigger. So I'll add a main class here and a subclass to the expression so that we can differentiate between the two. So here I'm gonna say main, and then the font size, maybe let's go with 7 gram, and for the sub maybe let's go with the font size of 3 gram, 30 pixels. I think it looks okay. Now let's add some margin bottom, like spacing below the result. So let's maybe go with let's go with 3 gram. Why it's not being applied? It has a class of main, sub, index oops, font size 7 gram, and oops, this has to be margin bottom. So yeah, now it looks quite similar to this. Maybe let's make this a bit more darker. So I'm gonna set the opacity to 0.9 so that it appears a bit grayed out, and maybe let's increase the font size a bit more, like 72 pixels. And yeah, it looks pretty close to this. Um, Now let's make it responsive for small devices. So like it is like very responsive out of the box, but we can make some adjustments for devices that are quite small. So yeah, here you can see that the layout breaks, so we can fix that by adding a breakpoint here. Oops, we're looking for window dot inner width. So what I'm doing here is that I'm using inspect element and then heading over to the console to know what the current inner width of the browser is. So I'm typing in window dot inner width. That gives us the inner width. So at width like 3 to 5 pixels, the layout breaks. So to adjust that, we can add a media query. So I'm gonna say max width, and let's go with 330 pixels. So what this means is that when the width of the viewport is 330 pixels or less than it, apply these styles to the HTML element. So at width less than 330 pixels, less than or equal to, we're targeting the HTML element, and I'm gonna set the font size to, let's say, 50 or 5%. So now you can see that it scales down nicely, like everything scales down nicely. This is another benefit of using this trick to font size, using this trick to size things. And let's resize it more and make it more smaller. And let's maybe add another breakpoint at 290 pixels. So I'm gonna copy this, paste it here, and here I'm gonna say 290 pixels. When the width is less than or equal to 290 pixels, we're gonna set the font size to 50 pixels. Not 50 pixels, 50%. What am I doing? So I can resize this more. So yeah, I think it's enough. Like it will look good on very small devices. Um, so yeah, it's not responsive. So yeah, I think we're done. So in the next video, we're gonna look at how can we make this functional via JavaScript. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.